You are standing in the skeletal ribcage of a forgotten chapel. The air itself is a cold, damp breath that smells of grave soil and a faint, sweet rot, like a bouquet of wilted lilies left on a crypt. Your hands, if you were to look at them, would be trembling, not from the chill, but from an old, persistent memory that clings to the stone. The memory of a forbidden oath. This room, this sacred shell, holds a silence so heavy it could crush bones. On this very spot, a bride and groom once stood. Their bodies were not their own. They were vessels for bloodlines, for kingdoms. A political contract signed with a drop of blood and a whispered promise. The priest's hands, shaking more than yours, held the marriage bands. Bands not of gold, but of cold iron, forged from the fear of a world that could never accept this union. You can still see the moonlight slice through the empty arches, illuminating the frantic, desperate exchange of vows. The bride's eyes, wide with a terror that was not for the groom, but for the dark future his touch would create. The groom's face, a mask of grim determination. He was not gaining a wife, but performing a surgical operation on his own soul. This was not a wedding. It was a secret sacrifice. A single, silent act so profoundly illegal, so fundamentally against the laws of God and man that it was meant to be scrubbed from existence. The priest who officiated was found weeks later, face down in a river, his throat slit. The witnesses, all three of them, vanished. They learned a lesson history refuses to teach. That some secrets are more binding than any law, more permanent than any life. You are the final witness, now, standing here. Your silent presence. A confession. Here's the hidden history of power. The truth you were never meant to hear. Behind every glorious chronicle of kings and queens, every lineage traced on a gilded scroll, lies a secret chapel like this. A place where legitimacy was not born, but brutally constructed. Think of the dynasties you are taught to admire, the beautiful royal families whose faces adorn our coins. Their power was not a gift from heaven. It was the consequence of a shadow marriage, a vile oath, a bloodline mixing with another like poison in wine. The throne is not inherited. It is built on a foundation of lies and silent rituals. Every great empire you know, every civilization you admire, is a beautiful facade built on this grotesque secret. They are monuments to hypocrisy. We are told to admire the public spectacle, the grand parade, the official proclamation. But the real work, the true horror, happens in the darkness. It is a conspiracy of silence. When a king's greatest triumph is not his conquest of a foreign land, but the silent, brutal conquest of his own heart, a single, forbidden child. A consequence of a moment like this becomes a ghost in the annals of history, a phantom waiting to claim a stolen throne. What do we call a civilization built on a lie? We call it our own. We call it history. But what happens to a kingdom when its most important contract is written not in stone, but in invisible ink? Now seeing the secret marriage networks across centuries like infected veins under Europe's skin. This section exposes the grotesque machinery of how these marriages operated. The forged death certificates. The children raised as orphans in convents who were actually heirs. The proxy weddings where a sword lay between bride and groom while the real husband was countries away. We explore specific techniques of erasure. How Maria Mancini's marriage to Louis XIV was dissolved not by annulment, but by rewriting reality itself. How morganatic marriages created half-ghosts who existed legally but not dynastically. The language becomes medical, dissecting how these marriages were tumors that kingdoms tried to cut out but whose metastases had already spread. The emotional weight shifts to the women especially, branded as mistresses when they were wives. Their children labeled bastards when they were legitimate. This section ends with the revelation that some of Europe's greatest dynasties are actually built on marriages that were hidden because they would have invalidated everything. The transition focuses on one specific marriage that nearly destroyed an empire, leading us into the heart of darkness. You thought it was a single event, a lone chap, a forgotten king. But pull back now. See it for what it truly is. Look at the map of Europe, not with its borders and cities, but with its hidden veins. Pieces of Odeon, what you're seeing are the grotesque, infected arteries of secret marriages. A silent, parasitic network running beneath the surface of every dynasty. The continent is a cancer patient, and these are the slow-growing tumors that historical records tried to excise, but whose tendrils had already spread. This is the hidden machinery of power. Forged death certificates of inconvenient spouses. Their lives disappearing into ink on a piece of paper that was never meant to be read. Children, true heirs to a throne, were raised as orphans in remote convents, their identities erased before they could even form. They were not children. They were living secrets, ticking bombs waiting in the silence. The ritual itself was a mockery. Some weddings were proxy affairs where a brother stood in for a king, and a sheathed sword was laid between the bride and a ghost of a husband who was countries away. The sword was a symbol, not of separation, but of the lie itself, the cold, hard truth that this union was never meant to be consummated by love, only by political necessity. History will tell you that the young Maria Mancini was merely a mistress to Louis XIV, a scandalous footnote in the Sun King's court. But the truth is more monstrous. Their marriage, a forbidden vow whispered in shadow, was not dissolved by annulment. It was dissolved by the king's power to rewrite reality, to declare that what had been had never been. The woman who walked out of his life was not a spurned lover. She was a ghost of a queen, her legal identity surgically removed. This is the ultimate cruelty. Not just to be rejected, but to be erased from your own life. To be a half-ghost, as was the fate of so many women in morganatic unions, legally wed but socially, dynastically, and spiritually null. Your body existed. Your vows were made, but your soul was cut from the historical record. The emotional weight of this truth is carried by the women and the children. The young queens branded as mistresses when they were wives. Their honor and dignity flayed from them for the sake of appearances. The deep, guttural shame of being a pawn in a game you were forced to lose from the start. And the children, the quiet, watchful children raised in convents, told they were a curse, a shame. Their mothers' whispers of a noble lineage, dismissed as hysteria. These children were living symbols of their parents' hypocrisy, a constant reminder of the illegitimacy they were forced to hide. But a lie cannot be hidden forever. A tumor cannot be wished away. This is the grotesque truth behind our fairy tales of kings and queens. Many of the most powerful dynasties in Europe are illegitimate. Their thrones are built on marriages that had to be hidden, because their revelation would have invalidated everything. The right to rule, the claim to blood, the entire scaffolding of their power. You were taught to admire the seamless transition of power from one gilded hand to the next. But the truth is a series of quiet, brutal surgeries. Every coronation was a performance of a legitimacy that was never truly earned, a mask worn over a face ravaged by decay. And as the lie metastasized through the centuries, it finally came to a head. One specific marriage, one single desperate act of defiance, and love, in the face of an empire's will, nearly shattered it all. It was a union that proved that a lie, no matter how deeply buried, will always find its way to the surface. And when it does, it brings the entire edifice down with it. This is where the invisible ink becomes a blood stain on the floor. Now, you are no longer a disembodied witness to history. You are in the nightmare. The year is 1547. You are in the chambers of Ferdinand I, the Holy Roman Emperor, but you are not his wife. You are the shadow. You are Philippine Welser, a commoner whose quiet rebellion, a secret marriage forged in defiance of the world, would plant a time bomb at the very heart of the Habsburg dynasty. Feel the silk of the dress, the one that hides the swelling of your belly, the one that, for all its beauty, feels like a cage. You are carrying the weight of a forbidden truth. Each day you walk through the court, a ghost at the banquet, a phantom in the gilded halls. You share the emperor's bed, his deepest secrets, his whispers of power. But in every official document, you do not exist. Your name is a stain that must be bleached from the record. You are the empress of nothing. The fear is a constant, gnawing presence. What if they find out? What happens to the life growing within you? The one that could crack the very foundation of an empire. The children come. They are perfect, with the fierce eyes of their father in your commoner hands. They are princes, born of an emperor's seed, and yet you must surrender them to the shadows. You watch them being shuffled between castles, hidden like contraband, told their mother is a distant noblewoman. A lie spoken so often you almost believe it yourself. You see their royal features, the Habsburg chin, the eyes that mirror their father's, and you know the truth. These are not orphans. They are hidden princes, their very existence a legal grenade. You realize your sons could, with a few, well, blessed debts, suddenly be next in line for the Holy Roman Empire itself. The thought is a poison you cannot resist. The final, brutal irony is this. Several of the great European houses that exist today are only legitimate because in the chaotic aftermath of a war, a very specific fire in 1619 burned the monastery walls that held the proof of your marriage. The documents were incinerated. Their secrets turned to ash, and the ghost of your claim finally disappeared. The empire was saved, not by its strength, but by a fortunate blaze, and the lie of legitimacy was made legitimate by accident. It is this kind of horror, this profound and fundamental erasure that leads to a question that chills even history itself. What happens when the lie of legitimacy is so powerful that it must be protected not just from records, but from the very possibility of truth itself? A fortunate fire, you say. A happy accident. What happens when the lie of legitimacy is so powerful that it must be protected not just from records, but from the very possibility of truth itself? This is where history ceases to be a story and becomes a crime scene. We move from the surgical metaphor to the morgue. Feel the chill now. It is 1817. You are in a royal bedchamber, and the air is thick with a different kind of horror. The brilliant, popular Princess Charlotte of Wales, heir to the throne, has a secret. She's married in a forbidden union to Leopold of Saxe-Coburg. Had she lived, she would have become queen, and the entire lineage of Queen Victoria, the woman who would later be called the grandmother of Europe, would have been extinguished. But she didn't live. At 21, she hemorrhaged on a bed, screaming in agony as her husband was locked outside the room. Unable to reach her, unable to hold her hand as she died. Historians call it a medical tragedy, an unfortunate birth complication. But you and I, we know the truth. This was not an accident. This was the assassination of a marriage, the murder of a bloodline. And this isn't a singular event. It's a pattern of violence, so ancient and well-practiced. It feels like a dark art. Think of Crown Prince Rudolph of Austria-Hungary, whose secret marriage to the beautiful Maria Mancini threatened to bring a liberal, democratic vision to the heart of the old empire. The official story is a suicide pact, a tragic love affair. But how does a suicide pact prevent a revolution? He was eliminated. His crime was not love, but a contract of love that carried a political weight too dangerous to bear. His body was found with a bullet in the head, but the real target was his vow. His marriage was murdered before it could be revealed. This is the next layer of the nightmare. The erasure of documents. The hidden children. That's just basic surgery. This is total grotesque eradication. You don't just bribe the priest. You make sure his entire order disappears. You don't just burn the marriage certificate. You burn the entire church where the ceremony took place. The narrative becomes a whisper of paranoia. The royal archives contain black rooms, not for historical preservation, but for the containment of truth, locked and hidden from the world. Certain documents, if they are even allowed to exist, are kept under lock and key, not to be looked at, but to ensure they never, ever surface again. The emotional weight of this is unbearable. These weren't just political murders. They were the assassination of love itself, a cold and calculated act of cruelty that destroyed two souls to preserve a lie. Couples who died rather than deny a marriage that, in the eyes of power, never existed. They were living, breathing proof that the truth of a union could be more dangerous than any army, more threatening than any rebellion, and the horror leads into our present. At least 3 of the current European monarchies you read about in magazines or see on news. Reports exist only because specific marriages were surgically removed from history. A bullet forged suicide note there, a conveniently timed illness. A pattern so chillingly consistent it feels less like history and more like a cold, calculated hit list. These crowns sit on the head of a lie protected by the brutal finality of murder. This leaves us with the most terrifying question of all. If they were willing to kill to hide these marriages, to erase love and life itself to protect a lie, what makes us think they've stopped? Now, stand with me. You are in the present day. You're watching a royal wedding on a screen, a sea of cameras, a public spectacle, a performance of beauty and tradition. The crowd cheers. The commentators gush about history and destiny. But you know the truth. You see the shadow of all the other weddings, the ones that had to be murdered before they could ever happen. You know that beneath every public ceremony is a shadow wedding, a hidden contract, a sacrifice that was never meant to be acknowledged. The mechanisms have simply modernized. The poison is no longer a physical blade, but a legal one. The silent witnesses are now an army of lawyers and public relations experts. Inconvenient partners are offered generous retirement packages to disappear into obscurity. Royal partners sign ironclad NDAs, binding them to silence with the threat of ruin. DNA tests that could rewrite a succession are sealed by court order, their results buried so deep that no one will ever find them. This is the modern face of erasure, the quiet, clean brutality of a contract. The assassination of a marriage is now a legal formality, a signing of a piece of paper that makes a person disappear. And this is where the philosophical terror truly sets in. Legitimacy itself is a fiction, a grand performance maintained by collective amnesia. We were told history is written by the victors, but that's a lie. History is written by the legitimate, and legitimacy is just a word for the most successful lie, the most convincing performance. Every throne is actually empty, because the real heirs are walking among us, utterly unaware of their claim. They are everywhere. They could be your neighbor, your colleague, the face you pass on the street, a hidden royal genome, a secret time bomb still ticking in the bloodlines of ordinary people. And don't for a moment think this is only a story of the past. There are unions being hidden right now, marriages that if revealed would invalidate entire lines of succession in a few of the world's most powerful ones. You can feel it, can't you? The quiet fear in the eyes of a prince, the tightly controlled narrative of a certain royal family. The silence is not a sign of a clean past, but a symptom of a very real, very present conspiracy. Some secrets aren't kept because they're in the past. They're kept because they are still happening. And somewhere in a sealed vault you'll never see, there is a marriage certificate with your name on it. A simple document that would unravel everything. The public narrative, the line of succession, the entire illusion of power. And as long as it remains in the dark, the lie of legitimacy is safe.